Welcome to Books in Five, where we interview the authors of recently published books on relevant topics. We'll be asking the author 5 questions, and they will have 5 minutes to answer each one. I'm very excited about my guest today, as he has written an excellent new book that will help businesses gain a competitive edge and achieve success in today's complex world. Dr. Lance Mortlock, thank you so much for being our guest on Books in Five. Please tell us the title of your book and where you are joining us from today.
So the title of my book is Outside In, Inside Out, Unleashing the Power of Business Strategy in Times of Market Uncertainty. And I'm in Calgary in Canada today.
Awesome. And very quickly, what is your background?
So my background is, threefold. I'm a strategist, so I work with companies all over the world on complex strategies. I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of Calgary, where I teach strategy and mentor and support students. And finally, I'm an author. So I wrote this recent book, which we're going to talk about, but I also wrote a book before that called Disaster Proof, which is on scenario planning. And I write extensively for various business magazines across North America and the world.
Great. Let's begin with our first question. Your book details why businesses should focus on developing well-conceived strategies when they are making decisions. Why is strategy so important, and what are the common pitfalls?
So I'd probably start by saying to your listeners, the world is changing very fast. The big will not beat the small anymore. It'll be the fast beating the slow. And I kind of mention that because when you think about that context, you think about competition. And in today's fast-paced environment, competition is, I would say, fierce, ever-present, and it'll come from those places that you least expect. Secondly, the world is increasingly interconnected, deeply interconnected, I would say. And whether you think about trade flows, harnessing the strategic benefits of that interconnection has never been more important. The world is also increasingly digital, and thinking about AI, data, analytics, and how you leverage the power of that new technology that is changing around us all the time is becoming even more important. So thinking about that in the context of your strategy, where you're going to play, how you're going to win is so important. Climate change is another aspect where, last year was the hottest year on record in the planet. And so we need to be thinking about climate change, net zero, sustainability, and what it means to our strategy as a company. And finally, complexity. Business operations have always are becoming increasingly complex, I would say. And so you need more sophisticated strategies to deal with that complexity, to create simplicity, as it were. So while not easy, I would say good strategy and successful execution is more important now than ever before.
We got about 2 more minutes for this question, and the second part of it was, what are the common pitfalls about executing and developing strategy?
So, look, I've been in and around strategy for 25 years. And what I've found through the some 80 organizations that I've supported and the several hundred projects that I've driven in this space is that ineffective strategies, or the pitfalls as you call them, come from too much emphasis on strategy development and not enough focus on execution, a lack of quantitative analysis and too much focus on qualitative analysis, creating strategy in a vacuum, as it were, without the appropriate level of engagement from employees. Employees are a fantastic source of information and ground truth. Not making the right trade-off decisions and confusing practical with blue sky, not aligning on the time frame, and I would say not simplifying the strategy so that one, employees understand it, and two, they remember it. And finally, limited strategic flexibility, where strategy is often thought about from getting from A to B without understanding that what happens if C happens in between. And so that flexibility is another pitfall that I think And I've seen many management teams forget about.
Let's move on to our second question. You've created a powerful framework that emphasizes the interconnections between the various components of strategy for leadership to think about. Can you walk us through the first key convergence, outside in?
Yeah, I mean, look, the first key convergence that I talk about in the book is this idea that you need to bring the outside in thinking, where, I would describe that as understanding what is going on in the outside world. Do we understand the market? Do we understand what our stakeholders, customers, for example, what are our customers saying? The competition. Have we thought about products and services that the competition provide and how that compares to ours? And are we doing scenario thinking and thinking about, in the context of scenarios, trends, signals? Are we, really understanding the difference between the signal and the noise? And so that outside in thinking is saying, do we understand what's happening in the outside world and bringing that into our company to make it real? The inside out thinking is, do we understand what's going on in the four walls of our company, the operating model, the risks that we face, how our portfolio is performing, our business? Do we understand the internal strengths and weaknesses? And so when you combine the outside and the inside, that first convergence that you ask about is the winning choices, those strategic choices that we can make. Where are we going to play and how are we going to win in the market? And often choices, in my experience, is also about choosing what not to do. You need to make solid strategic choices to kind of win. And I once had the opportunity to meet with and spend time with Malcolm Gladwell. And he talks about, quote, the key to good decision making and therefore choices is not knowledge, it's understanding. And we are swimming in the former and we are desperately lacking in the latter. And his point being that when you make choices, you combine that outside and that inside thinking to generate understanding, not knowledge. And understanding is the true key to success in those strategic choices that you make.
Let's dive a little bit more deeper into one of the components that you brought up about bringing the outside in. Can you talk a little bit more about understanding your competition that's out there in the marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the outside in part is broken out into the components that I described. Part of it is market analysis. And it's interesting. Last year, I would share that we created 147 zettabytes of data in 1 year as a global planet. And you know that 90% of that data we don't actually use. So we're swimming in data that we don't use. And if we could figure out how to better leverage using tools like AI and other tools to leverage that data, think of the power of the decision making we could make, enabled by that data. And so market analysis is saying, okay, we've got all this data out there. Let's gather it. Let's think about what it means, including what are the competition doing. The key, I think, lesson in a rapidly changing world is not to make decisions based on gut and intuition. Gut and intuition play a role for sure, but rather committing the necessary time and energy to really understand the market, the competition, analyzing the facts and the data more than ever before. Those unbiased perspectives so that you avoid those mistakes. And competition analysis is part of that. It's critical for, I think, incumbent organizations and new market entrants to really understand from the outside in, what is the landscape? Who are the key players? Where are we going to play in that landscape? And really do that robust competitive analysis to help determine, what's the opportunity we as a company should be exploiting? How can we differentiate, our products and services in the market? And that really is the essence of what I call the outside in thinking. And it's a key part of the book.
Let's move on to our third question. It is critical that decision makers accurately understand the internal state of their organization. What are the factors that should be examined as it assesses its capability and potential? What you have labeled inside out.
You know, I think that part of that is, and I would preface my response to your question, that when, according to the World Economic Forum, the percentage risk of instability and risk of global catastrophes is at 54% right now. The world is swimming in risk. So risk is a really important part of sort of understanding your internal kind of machinations. And part of when you break it down is understanding your operating model. How do you do business? Does your operating model represent how or what you are focused on strategically from the inside out? That includes the tasks, the activities, the processes, the capabilities that characterize the company at the end of the day. And it's the business performance. It's about collecting, analyzing information to make sure that we understand how our company is performing. Is it profitable? Are we generating sales and revenue? What products and services are performing well? And that gets into the portfolio. That if we're an amalgamation of different portfolio companies or business units or product lines or service lines, what have you, do we have a disciplined process of reviewing that portfolio of holdings to identify what's performing and what's not performing that maybe we should divest? Or those areas that are performing well that we should double down and reinvest to scale the level of growth and the performance, profitability, sales, and revenue. But it's also understanding what are our risks? And I think, risk management is a key strategic tool in helping prepare for internal hazards, external hazards, and threats. One of the companies that I talk about in my book is Mars, the chocolate bars. And, they do a really good job of enterprise risk management globally. One of the key things for Mars is the production of cocoa plants that they use to make chocolate. And with climate change, key risk for them, parts of the world are changing in terms of the climate. So where they used to grow cocoa before will not be where they grow cocoa in the future. And so managing that risk as part of their internal risk management process, fundamental to success for Mars. And they do, a really good job of, understanding those internal factors. And I think, those internal factors, 100% fundamental to know where your strengths and weaknesses lie in terms of your operating model, because that is what will support your strategy, when it comes to figuring out where to play, how to win.
We have about 90 more seconds for this question. You have a chapter in this section about M&A. Can you talk about the importance about understanding your internal strengths and weaknesses with regard to M&A?
Yeah, I mean, M&A is a key part of the strategy, and you need to have a view. And I actually just wrote an article for this. You can find it in a UK magazine called Management Today. And what I talk about is different M&A strategies, whether it's transformation, consolidation, tuck-ins. You need to understand what you're capable of consuming from a merger acquisition perspective. Like, are you trying to get into new products and services, or are you trying to swallow up all those smaller companies to become a bigger scale company in the existing products and services that you provide? And so I think that that's fundamental as well in terms of where to play, how to win, the choices that you want to make, and thinking about how you bring the outside in and the inside out thinking together.
Let's move on to our fourth question. After the strategy has been developed, arrangement and assembly of the necessary elements take place. Tell us more about how a firm begins to prepare for execution.
Yeah, I mean, look, execution or preparing for execution is about making sure you're focused on the right things that will enable the strategy. 64% of executives say that they have too many conflicting priorities, according to an HBR review article, Stop Chasing Too Many Priorities. So prioritization is fundamental, and it's the first part of what I would call prepare to execute, to say, what are we going to focus on? Steve Jobs once said that organizations are at a great advantage when they learn to say no to the 100 other good ideas that are out there. So saying no is part of this, prioritizing is part of this, but it's also about saying, well, what's the operating model that we want to support the strategy? How are we going to make decisions? How are we going to govern? How are we going to organize? And in terms of the organization, what's our org structure at the end of the day? What kind of talent do we need? How are we going to allocate capital? Companies must consistently make, the right capital allocation decisions that support the strategy at the end of the day. And in terms of capability and talent, according to Predictive Index, 36% of organizations have a talent management strategy. That's a terrible statistic. That our most important asset, which is our people, only 36% of organizations, and this was a study of thousands of companies, actually have a talent management strategy. So we've got to get that right. In terms of capital allocation, one of the things I would say, and this is part of prepare for execution, is, Texas Instruments, and again, I talk about this in my book, they're a great example of a company that's very, very clear about where they put their money is in support of what they're trying to achieve strategically. And, it's a great technology company that does, very, very well in the marketplace because they have this relentless focus between how they set up the prepare for execution in alignment with the strategy.
We have about 2 more minutes for this question, talking about preparation for execution. Can you talk about your chapter about developing a roadmap?
Yeah, in terms of the roadmap, this is where you need to be thinking about what are you going to focus on now, maybe in the next year? What are you going to focus on next, maybe next year? And what are you going to focus on beyond? It's about a sequence of initiatives that support your strategic imperatives and putting them on a roadmap that you're managing in a disciplined way. And one of the mistakes that I see many organizations fall into, or the traps that they fall into, is trying to do too much all at once. So they do everything average or everything not at all. And so what I say is, how do you build that continuous pace of initiatives so that you're delivering consistent value over a manageable pace over a number of years, and importantly, building flexibility for break in work, which is always going to happen. And what is your governance process for saying, look, if we add something and we're not going to add resources, what are we going to take off? Because too often companies add additional initiatives and then they just get overloaded, and then the organization gets into gridlock and the initiatives do not get delivered, properly. And so the roadmap is that now, that next, that beyond, and thinking about that sequence.
Maybe about another minute. Can you tell us about the importance of choosing an adequate operating model?
Yeah, look, the operating model brings the strategy to life. It's how the company get things done. And so the operating model translates the strategy into reality. It's the bridge, I would say, from the why of the strategy to the how in terms of the day-to-day operations. And it gives the employees something tangible in terms of how decisions get made, how business units and functions are organized, how interfaces occur, and all of that. So you need to be clear about your operating model if you want to translate your strategy effectively.
Let's conclude with our last question. Finally, the business applies and implements the strategy, and it should succeed because it has considered all the possible opportunities and challenges. What should executives be monitoring and adjusting as the project comes into being?
I'll start by answering this question by saying 90% of strategies fail because of bad execution. Not because they had the wrong strategy, it's because of bad execution. And many organizations don't spend enough time thinking about disciplined execution and how exactly they're going to do that. And so when you break down execution, and I talk about this in the book, it's about, if you're doing a deal, post-merger integration, bringing two companies together or swallowing up another company as part of a consolidation play. It's about cost management, managing costs in a central, coordinated way within the company. A great example I talk about in the book is Ryanair. They are disciplined in terms of how they do cost management. Cost is a focus for them in everything they do, how they organize, the types of planes that they buy. They have a standardized fleet, which lowers their maintenance costs, how they load passengers onto the plane, the extras that they sell as part of a package beyond the core ticket. Cost management is fundamental to their execution. Execution is also about program management and governance. You've got this roadmap, which we talked about, of initiatives that you're going to implement now, next, and beyond. But you need good program management to drive the discipline amongst those initiatives and those projects, that governance that keeps the projects running smoothly, on budget, on time, to the right level of quality. It's about monitoring decisions to make sure that where responsibilities lie within the given program, that they're executed on properly. And it's just about making sure you're managing and monitoring program progress against the roadmap. And execution against that roadmap, I would say, is critical to success, and probably one of the areas that most organizations fail at. I talked about Ryanair, but there's many other examples of companies that relentlessly execute against their program. I talk about in the book, IKEA is a great example of focused execution, but there's also other airline examples like EasyJet, which is very similar to Ryanair in terms of their philosophy. And they're very disciplined around how they execute against their strategy.
We have about 2 more minutes for this question. Can you tell us more about your chapter regarding innovation?
Yeah, I mean, look, innovation, some companies are fast followers. Some companies are out there. According to a study that I talk about, published by Aiming, around 31% of companies failed to innovate during the COVID crisis, and many of those companies don't exist today. Business leaders, I think, that embrace innovation and the critical role are most likely to thrive against an increasingly global competitive landscape. And, with rapidly evolving technology, fiscal, demographic, and other social changes, innovation is, fundamental to many companies. One of the things I talk about in the book is the importance of a portfolio of innovation ideas, the sustaining, adjacent, and disruptive innovation. But look, I mean, there's some companies out there that truly don't need to innovate. They fast follow others, implement what others have done, and they have a good business as a result of that.
Our final minute, Dr. Mortlock, can you tell us about the reception from executives and readers of the book? Are you pleased with how it's coming across? Do you think that people are going to be implementing what you're describing in the book?
Yeah, I mean, look, I feel very fortunate to have received a lot of endorsements from leaders, not only across Canada, but across the world. And a lot of support. It's an Amazon Canada best-selling book. And the future of strategy requires this kind of framework, whether you think about some of the aspects of digitization, climate change, connectivity, innovation, and the importance of building flexibility. This book comes at such an important time in business that I'm really feeling the pull in terms of management teams wanting to implement this framework to really reshape how they think about strategy in the future.
Dr. Mortlock, thank you so much for joining us on Books in 5. That has been our 5 questions. You've answered them in 5 minutes. Let's move on to our bonus questions. Can you tell us a little bit more about your career path? What motivated you to become a strategist?
I kind of fell into it a little bit by accident. I did my MBA at Cardiff University in Wales in the UK. And from MBA school, I was at a career fair and started talking to a big global consulting company. And next thing I knew, I got a job and I went to the Middle East and started working on a big transformation project. And then one thing led to another, and here I am 25 years later, still working in professional services. And look, at the end of the day, having a lot of fun helping clients solve some of their most complex problems and working with incredibly smart people.
Obviously, the book is a major achievement, but can you tell us more about another accomplishment that you're proud of?
I'll tell you something different, because I could tell you, well, I wrote another book, and that would be kind of boring for your listeners. One of the things that I'm incredibly proud of is my kids. I have 2 amazing girls, and my girls, they horse ride competitively, You would never catch me on a horseback. I'm kind of afraid of horses, but these girls get on a 1-ton animal and they go at speed over jumps. And it's just, as a father, it's an incredibly great thing to watch. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is, for fun, I climb mountains. I like climbing very high mountains and difficult mountains. I've climbed all over the world. Probably one of the proudest moments was when I summited the mountain in Alaska called McKinley, Denali. It was a 4-week expedition. But more recently, I climbed a mountain in Canada called Mount Robson. And it took me 5 attempts before I was able to make it to the summit.
Got it. And our final question here, can you tell us a little bit more about what you might be working on next in terms of a writing project or even some professional work?
I am as I mentioned, I'm pretty interested in mountaineering. Next year, I'm part of an expedition with a company called True Patriot Love, who raise money for war veterans that are suffering from challenges as it relates to PTSD and mental health. And so, as part of this charitable organization, a group of us are trying to raise $1 million to support war veterans. And part of that is we're doing a major expedition to climb Mount Waddington next year. So I'm in the throes of helping organize that and raise money for a good cause.
Amazing. Again, the title of the book is Outside In, Inside Out. I'll put a link to the book in the show notes. You should definitely check it out. If you're not able to buy it, reach out to your local library because I'm sure they will have it stocked. Dr. Mortlock, thank you so much for joining us on Books in 5.
Thanks for having me.
The host of Books in 5 is Bhavan Sodhan. Books in 5 is produced in collaboration with Podfather Creative in Vancouver, Canada.